They say a wedding is the beginning of a story, a blank page, a fresh chapter. But some stories have been written long before the first dance, and on a sun-drenched Saturday in late June, I felt like I was standing at the end of one rather than the start of another. My name is Alina Vance. For 25 years, I've been a high school history teacher in a town so small the local diner is considered a major landmark. It's the kind of place where a person's worth isn't measured by their bank account, but by the kindness in their eyes and the calluses on their hands. I've always found comfort in that, in the simple, honest math of a life well lived. But today, simple and honest felt a million miles away. I stood in the manicured gardens of the Ashford Estate in Connecticut, a place that smelled of money and old-world elegance. The scent was a strange mix of blooming hydrangeas and the faint, dusty perfume of generational wealth, a smell I'd only ever encountered in glossy magazines. My daughter, Jessica, was marrying Benjamin Ashford, a man whose family name was a whisper in the halls of power, a name that came with its own zip code and a private jet. I was here, but I wasn't here. I was a ghost in the machine, a misplaced artifact in a museum of the privileged. I'd driven up from my little house in Boston that morning, wearing the navy silk dress I'd bought for the occasion. It was a designer dress, a rare extravagance, and I'd convinced myself it was enough. But surrounded by the other guests, it felt like a cheap knockoff. The women were draped in fabrics that shimmered with unspoken price tags, their diamonds catching the sunlight in dazzling, silent conversation. Their laughter, a soft, practiced sound, felt like a language I'd never learned. I watched Jessica from a distance. She was radiant, a vision in her grandmother-in-law's vintage lace gown, a family heirloom that Patricia Ashford had insisted on. Jessica had a different kind of beauty now, a polished, untouchable kind. It wasn't the same girl who used to dig for worms after a rainstorm or sit on the kitchen floor with a bowl of Cheerios, telling me about her dreams of becoming a veterinarian. She was a different person, one I barely recognized. My husband, Mark, would have loved this. He always said a wedding was a kind of magic, a moment when the future and the past held hands. But Mark wasn't here. He'd been gone for 3 years, a quiet, gentle man who faded away from me and from the world, leaving a hollow space in my heart that still ached on quiet mornings. He'd be so proud of Jessica. He'd see the grand ballroom, the 200 guests, the flowers that must have cost more than a new car, and he'd see it as a testament to all her hard work. He'd never guess what it really was. I drifted toward a quiet corner, near a hedge of perfectly trimmed boxwoods. The music from the string quartet was a soft hum, but I'd always had a knack for tuning into conversations, a teacher's habit of listening for trouble, and that's when I heard it. Jessica's voice, a low murmur speaking to Patricia, her new mother-in-law. "Don't worry about her," Jessica was saying, her tone dismissive like she was shooing away a fly. "She's just a pathetic failure, nothing like you." The words hit me like a physical blow. The air rushed from my lungs. I gripped my champagne glass so tightly I thought the delicate stem would snap. Pathetic failure. I replayed the words in my head, but they didn't change. It was my daughter. My Jessica. Patricia gave a cool laugh. "Some people from simpler backgrounds just don't understand how to navigate this world, darling. It's sweet that you're trying to include her, but she'll never truly fit in." Simpler backgrounds. I thought of the double shifts I'd worked to put Jessica through college, the weekends I'd spent grading papers while she was at dance practice, the year Mark and I gave up our vacation so she could go to summer camp, the years of sacrificed dreams, the quiet, daily grind of a life lived for someone else. And for what? To be called a pathetic failure by the very person I'd sacrificed for. My heart, that old, dependable muscle, felt like it was crumbling. The reality of the moment was so much worse than I could have imagined. It wasn't just a snub, it was a complete and utter dismissal of my life's work. It wasn't just a careless word, it was an amputation. My hand went to my purse, a reflex. Inside, in a small, worn case, was the video Mark had given me just a week before he died. "Only if you need it, Dot," he'd whispered, his voice weak but his eyes as clear as they'd ever been. "You promise me, if she ever treats you badly, you show her this. She needs to know what I really thought about some things." I'd carried it with me everywhere since, a relic from a life I'd lost, a promise I'd never imagined I would need to keep. But now, standing there, listening to my own daughter describe me as something to be pitied, I knew Mark had seen something coming that I had been too blind, or perhaps too hopeful, to see. He'd watched Jessica change in his final months, and he'd known that the love he'd so carefully nurtured in our family had begun to curdle into something else entirely. The cocktail hour continued around me, a blur of practiced smiles and polite conversation, but I was no longer a part of it. I slipped away, a ghost returning to her own haunted past, clutching a small, ordinary box that held a truth more devastating than any lie. The wedding was a lie. The love I thought we had was a lie. And in the heart of that beautifully manicured garden, I knew that the battle for my daughter's soul was just beginning. And I had the first weapon. I left the perfect facade of the Ashford estate in a daze, the scent of fresh-cut flowers and expensive perfume giving way to the raw sting of betrayal. The drive back to Hartford, the city I'd called home for nearly 30 years, was a silent one. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the rolling hills of Connecticut, but all I could see were the ghosts of my memories, flickering in the rearview mirror. Pathetic failure. The words repeated in my mind, a cruel echo that drowned out the radio. I remembered the night Mark and I had sat at our kitchen table, counting change from a jar to pay for Jessica's ballet lessons. "It's worth it, Alina," Mark had said, his gentle hand covering mine. "She has so much fire in her. We have to give her every chance to shine." We'd scrimped and saved, making a life out of love and shared sacrifice, believing that we were building something strong and beautiful for our daughter. Was it all just a prelude to this? A backdrop for her to belittle the very people who had given her everything? My grip tightened on the steering wheel as I thought of Mark. His final months had been a quiet, painful descent. We'd spent those last days in a haze of doctor's appointments and quiet conversations. I was so focused on his fading health that I'd missed the subtle shift in Jessica. But Mark hadn't. He'd noticed her newfound fascination with our finances, her casual questions about his will. "She's worried about your future," Jessica had said, her voice smooth and practiced. But in his final letter to me, he wrote, "I've been watching her, and I don't think worry is the right word." The memory brought a fresh wave of pain. My husband, in his last moments, hadn't just been fighting for his life, he'd been fighting to protect mine. He'd seen the cold calculation in our daughter's eyes, a coldness that I was only now beginning to recognize. He hadn't been angry, just observant. And in his quiet, resolute way, he'd found a way to warn me, to arm me, to give me the truth that my heart had refused to accept. I finally pulled into the parking lot of my small apartment complex, a brick building that looked humble next to the palatial grandeur of the Ashford estate. The contrast was stark, and for the first time, it didn't feel like a comfort. It felt like a cage. I sat in the car for a long moment, the keys still in the ignition, watching the streetlights flicker on. My world had just been turned upside down, and the only anchor I had was a cryptic video left by a man who was no longer here. With a deep breath, I got out of the car, the cool evening air a sharp contrast to the suffocating heat of the wedding. Inside my apartment, the familiar smell of old books and lavender should have been a comfort, but it wasn't. It felt empty. I went straight to my purse, my fingers trembling as I unzipped the side pocket and pulled out the small, black case. My heart hammered against my ribs as I looked at it. The promise, the one Mark had made me swear to keep. I went to my bedroom, a small space with a large window that looked out over the city. I set the case down on my nightstand, the sleek modern design of the device feeling alien in my simple room. I took a moment, just breathing, trying to calm the storm raging inside me. This wasn't about revenge. This was about understanding. It was about facing a truth that was more painful than any lie. I needed to know what had happened to the girl I had raised, the one who had promised to take care of me after her father was gone. I needed to see what Mark had seen. I slid the small lever to open the case. Inside, a tiny video screen flickered to life. I pressed play, and there he was, Mark. His face was gaunt, his skin sallow, but his eyes were the same kind. Intelligent eyes I had fallen in love with all those years ago. He was propped up on pillows, a blanket over his legs. "Hey, my love," he whispered, his voice weak and raspy. If you're watching this, it means she's shown you who she's become, not who she used to be. And I'm so, so sorry. My vision blurred with tears as he spoke of his observations. He talked about Jessica's increasing impatience, her subtle remarks about the cost of his medication, her constant inquiries about my apartment, and my financial situation. He even mentioned her plans for an assisted living facility. My heart ached for him, for the quiet fear he must have lived with, the realization that his own daughter saw his death not as a loss, but as an opportunity. He described a brochure he had seen in her purse for a place called Meadowbrook Manor, a place Jessica had described as a wonderful senior community. The same place she had tried to pressure me into considering. Mark said, "She told me it was just planning ahead, but I don't think planning is the right word, Alina." As I listened, a chill that had nothing to do with the night air spread through my body. The sweet, kind girl who had held her father's hand as he passed away was gone. In her place was a stranger, a woman who saw me not as a person with a heart and a soul, but as a financial liability, a problem to be managed. The video ended, and I was left in the silence of my bedroom, surrounded by a truth so devastating I could barely comprehend it. Mark hadn't given me a weapon. He had given me a mirror. He had given me the one thing I had needed all along: permission to fight back, to stand up for the woman I was, and to refuse to become the pathetic failure my daughter had so coldly declared me to be. The quiet, grieving widow I had been for 3 years was gone. In her place, a different woman began to stir, a woman with the fire of a history teacher who knew that justice, like the truth, had to be fought for. And in that moment, in the quiet solitude of my apartment, I knew that the real story, the one that truly mattered, was about to begin. The silence of my apartment felt different now. It wasn't just a physical absence, it was the quiet of a battlefield after the first shot has been fired. The video sat on my nightstand, a small black sentinel of truth, and in the morning light I saw my reflection in its blank screen. A woman in her late 60s, a teacher, a widow. But underneath that familiar exterior, a new resolve was hardening. I wasn't going to be a victim in my own story. I was going to be a detective. My first lead was the place Mark had mentioned, Meadowbrook Manor. A quick search online revealed a glossy professional website. It looked less like a nursing home and more like a five-star resort for the silver-haired set. There were photos of manicured grounds, elegant dining rooms, and seniors laughing over board games. The website touted exclusive assisted living and a peaceful, dignified retirement. It was the kind of place that cost a fortune, and I wondered how Jessica, with her still new career, had been able to afford to put me on a waiting list. My teaching career had taught me a thing or two about research. You don't just look at the cover, you dig for the footnotes. I used my old school library credentials to access academic databases and public records. It took a few hours, but soon a very different picture of Meadowbrook Manor began to emerge. The place had been investigated twice by the state in the past 5 years for something called inappropriate marketing to vulnerable seniors. Online reviews, the kind you have to dig for, were even more damning. Families complained about high-pressure sales tactics, about being rushed into signing contracts right after a loved one's death. One review from a woman named Susan Miller spoke of feeling manipulated and preyed upon after her husband passed. She had been convinced to sign over his entire life insurance policy in exchange for a room for herself. A chill went down my spine. This wasn't a peaceful retirement community. It was a well-oiled machine designed to separate people from their money. Jessica had recommended this place. That afternoon, I called my friend Margaret, who still worked at the public library. Margaret was 5 years younger, full of energy and fiercely loyal. We'd worked together for nearly 30 years, navigating everything from dusty microfilm machines to the digital age. I told her I was working on a personal research project about senior living options in Connecticut, and she, with her usual directness, offered to help. Meadowbrook Manor, huh? She said, her voice a mix of interest and suspicion. That place has a reputation, not a good one. Margaret helped me compile a file of public records, state investigation reports, legal filings, and consumer complaints. What we found was shocking. The facility's business model was a predatory one. They actively sought out families in mourning, offering estate protection services and guaranteed care for life in exchange for a full transfer of assets. They had connections with certain funeral homes and lawyers who would refer grieving families to them at their most vulnerable. I thanked Margaret and hung up the phone, the weight of my findings pressing on me. This wasn't a simple case of a thoughtless daughter. This was a calculated plan. Mark had been right. Jessica hadn't been worried about my future. She had been trying to secure hers by taking control of mine. My mind went back to the months leading up to Mark's death. I had been so consumed with his care that I'd been blind to the subtle changes in Jessica. She had moved back home for a few months after a difficult breakup and sat at Mark's bedside, holding his hand, promising to take care of me. Was it all a performance? Had she been watching his life fade, not with grief, but with a cold financial calculation? The more I looked, the more the facade crumbled. I remembered a conversation we had just a few months ago. Jessica had been over for dinner, and she had talked about Patricia's plans for them. "They're going to put me on a museum board," she'd said, her eyes shining with ambition. "It's all about who you know, Mom. Patricia knows everyone." The pieces of the puzzle were finally falling into place. Jessica wasn't just marrying into money, she was marrying into a social climbing project, a game that Patricia had been playing for decades. And to play that game, you had to cut ties with anything that might weigh you down, anything that might remind people of your humble origins. I was that reminder. The next day, I called Jessica. Her voice was unusually warm, a sweetness I hadn't heard since before the wedding. "Mom, I was just about to call you. I've been so worried. Are you sleeping okay?" "I'm fine, Jessica," I said, my voice as neutral as I could make it. "I was just wondering if you could meet me for lunch, just the two of us." Her hesitation was almost imperceptible. "Lunch? I'm so busy, Mom. What's this about?" "It's about our future," I said, the words carefully chosen. "I've been thinking about what you said about needing to plan ahead." Her tone instantly changed, a rush of enthusiasm. "Oh, Mom, that's wonderful. I've already been doing some research for you. Patricia knows this amazing place. It's called Meadowbrook Manor?" There it was. The name on her lips, a soft, seductive lie. My heart, which had been so shattered just days ago, felt hard now, like a stone. I agreed to meet her at a trendy bistro in West Hartford, a place that felt more like Patricia's world than my own. I knew this lunch wasn't about catching up. It was an intervention. And this time I was ready. I wasn't just bringing my grief and my memories, I was bringing my research. And a very different kind of plan. The bistro was all polished concrete and minimalist furniture, the kind of place where the food was more art than sustenance. Jessica was already there when I arrived, looking radiant in a cream-colored silk blouse and perfectly tailored trousers. Her smile was bright and practiced, a socialite's armor. She kissed my cheek, the gesture feeling more like an empty formality than a sign of affection. "Mom, you look tired," she said, her voice laced with a false concern that set my teeth on edge. "Are you sleeping okay? It's been so quiet in your neighborhood. I worry about you living all alone." I ordered a simple salad and listened as she chattered about her honeymoon in Italy, about the charity boards Patricia was helping her join, and about Michael's family's summer home in the Hamptons. It was like listening to a character from a movie, a perfect life narrated in carefully curated sound bites. Every detail was designed to impress, to show me how far she'd come. I watched her, this woman who was my daughter and a stranger all at once. I remembered the little girl who would sit on my lap and ask me to read her stories, her head resting on my shoulder. Where was that girl now? Had she been absorbed by this new world, this new persona? Or had she simply buried her, along with the memories of a simpler life? Finally, after we'd ordered coffee, the pretense began to crack. "Mom, Michael, and I have been talking," she started, her smile tightening. "We're concerned about your future. That apartment you're renting is so small, and the neighborhood, it isn't getting any safer. We think it's time you considered moving somewhere more appropriate for someone your age." There it was, the opening line to the script I knew so well. I kept my voice neutral. "Appropriate? Well, secure," she said, leaning forward and lowering her voice conspiratorially. "With medical services nearby, maybe some social activities." Her eyes shone with a calculated brightness. Patricia knows about this wonderful senior community, about an hour from our house. Very exclusive, very nice. The waiting list is usually years long, but they have a spot opening up next month. I set down my coffee cup carefully, the clink of ceramic against the saucer, the only sound in the quiet space between us. Senior community, Jessica. I'm perfectly capable of living independently. Her hand reached across the table and patted mine, a gesture of condescending comfort. Of course you are now, but it's about planning ahead. And honestly, it would give us all peace of mind to know you're somewhere safe. The word safe was a lie. The real word was convenient. It wasn't about my well-being, it was about her peace of mind. Her hand rested on mine, and for a moment I felt the phantom touch of a child's hand, the small, trusting fingers of the girl who used to hold my hand and promise to take care of me. The best part, she continued, is you wouldn't have to worry about finances anymore. They have a program where you can transfer your assets, and they guarantee care for life. There it was. The asset protection program I'd researched with Margaret. A legal maneuver designed to separate me from everything Mark and I had built, in exchange for a room in a facility where I could be easily forgotten. The rage, cold and hard as stone, began to simmer just beneath my skin. That's very thoughtful, I said, my voice slow and measured. But I'm not ready to make that kind of decision yet. I'm enjoying my independence. Jessica's smile tightened, her mask slipping just enough to reveal the impatience underneath. Mom, I understand that it's hard to admit when you might need help, but Dad's been gone for 3 years. You can't keep pretending you can handle everything on your own indefinitely. I'm not pretending anything, I replied, my voice gaining a sharp edge. I'm managing just fine, are you? Her brow furrowed in confusion. Because I've noticed you seem a bit scattered lately, she continued, pushing forward with her carefully rehearsed lines. Forgetting appointments, missing calls. Patricia mentioned you seemed confused at the wedding, out of place. I felt a sudden, fierce flash of anger, hot and sharp. I seemed confused because I was listening to you call me a pathetic failure. That tends to be disorienting. Jessica blinked, her perfect facade shattering. She stared at me, her mouth slightly agape. She hadn't expected me to confront her so directly, to know what she had said. I never said that, she stammered, her voice suddenly unsure. You told Patricia I was a pathetic failure who'd never accomplished anything worthwhile. You said working at the library for 30 years was depressing. I heard you, Jessica. That's not you're taking things out of context, she insisted, her voice rising in a panicked defense. I was just trying to reassure her that you weren't going to be demanding or difficult. By calling me a failure, by explaining that I have realistic expectations about my place in your lives going forward. Her mask was completely gone now. The calculation underneath was raw and exposed. Mom, this isn't about what you overheard. This is about being practical. You're 68 years old. You need to start planning for the future. I signaled for the check, my hand no longer trembling. Jessica, I am planning for the future. I'm planning to live my life on my own terms for as long as I'm able. And when you're not able? She asked, her voice laced with genuine fear. When you fall and break a hip or have a stroke or develop dementia, who do you think is going to take care of you? The question hung in the air, raw and honest. This was it. This was the heart of it all. Not my present, but my potential future. Not my needs, but her terror of them. She wasn't worried about my current life. She was terrified of the possibility that my future needs might interfere with her carefully planned new one. I'll cross that bridge when I come to it, I said, standing to leave. But Jessica, when that time comes, I hope I'll still have a daughter who sees me as a person worth caring about, not just a problem to be solved. I drove home from that lunch with a grim satisfaction. Jessica had been forced to drop her polite mask, revealing the cold fear and calculation that had been driving her. But while the emotional confrontation had been cathartic, I knew it was just the beginning. Her fear wouldn't make her back down. It would make her double down. Patricia was in control, and I knew she wouldn't let go of her plan just because I'd called her daughter-in-law out. The next move wouldn't be a polite lunch. It would be an ambush, and I wasn't going to wait for it. The following morning, I called a family friend, a retired lawyer named Arthur Jenkins. Arthur had been Mark's golf buddy for years, a man with a mind as sharp as a tack and a heart as big as a house. He knew our story, and more importantly, he knew Mark's final wishes. I laid out the whole tangled mess for him, from the words I'd overheard at the wedding to the Meadowbrook Manor research and the confrontation at the bistro. Arthur listened patiently, his silence more comforting than any platitude. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Eleanor, he said finally, his voice grave, this is more than just a family disagreement. This is a potential case of elder abuse and financial exploitation. Patricia Ashford has a reputation for being ruthless. She'll try to find a way to have you declared incompetent to get power of attorney to force you to sign over your assets. What can I do? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. We fight, he said, his tone firm. We put up a legal wall they can't climb over. First, you need to sign a new will, a living will, and a durable power of attorney for yourself. We'll make sure everything is watertight, leaving no room for a contest. Over the next few weeks, Arthur and I worked tirelessly. We drafted a new will that left everything to a trust, with strict instructions that Jessica could not contest it. We established a legal framework that ensured no one, not Jessica, not Patricia, not even Michael, could make medical or financial decisions for me without my explicit, written consent. We made copies of all the research I had compiled on Meadowbrook Manor, creating a file so comprehensive it could serve as a legal brief on its own. I knew my life was under a microscope, and I wasn't going to give them a single crack to exploit. I started keeping a detailed journal of my daily activities, doctor appointments, and conversations. I became a walking, talking library of my own life, meticulously documenting my mental and physical acuity. It was a strange and unsettling way to live, but it was a necessary shield. Then the call came, not from Jessica, but from Patricia herself. Her voice, usually so cold and composed, was laced with an uncharacteristic sweetness. Eleanor, darling, Michael and Jessica are terribly worried about you. We'd like to invite you over for a little family dinner to talk. Just a quiet evening, no pressure at all. I almost laughed. No pressure was Patricia Ashford's favorite phrase for a high-stakes ambush. That's very kind of you, Patricia, I said, my voice as sweet as hers. But how about we meet at my place? My apartment is so cozy. It would be a nice change of scenery for you. Her momentary silence was telling. My small apartment was the antithesis of everything she stood for. She wanted me on her territory, where she could control the conversation and the optics. She wanted to play on a stage she had built, but I had a new stage now, one of my own. I'm sorry, Eleanor, that's not possible, she said, her voice turning cold. We're a family now. Family business should be handled in a family home. Michael and Jessica will be here. We're all very concerned about you. We've come to a collective decision about the best path forward. Collective decision. A decision made without my consent or input, the very essence of their plan. I'll be there, I said and hung up. I arrived at the Ashford estate exactly on time. I was wearing a simple wool dress, the kind I'd wear to work, and carried a small, worn leather briefcase. I refused to let their wealth intimidate me. When I was ushered into their formal living room, the tableau was exactly as I had expected. Jessica, Michael, and Patricia were seated on a plush sofa, facing a single armchair placed opposite them. It was a perfect staging of a modern-day tribunal with me as the defendant. Eleanor, thank you for coming, Patricia said, her smile not reaching her eyes. We are all very worried about your recent behavior. Jessica tells us you've been forgetting things, acting erratically. Michael, looking uncomfortable, spoke up. Mom, we just want to make sure you're getting the care you need. You seem confused, Jessica added, picking up the lines from our last conversation. You seem to be misinterpreting things. We have a great opportunity for you at Meadowbrook Manor. All you need to do is sign these papers. Michael pulled out a folder of documents, a power of attorney form, asset transfer agreements, and the familiar brochures for Meadowbrook Manor. The air in the room was thick with their carefully rehearsed lines and feigned concern. They were trying to paint a picture of a frail, confused old woman who needed to be taken care of. But I wasn't that woman. I placed my briefcase on the floor and opened it, pulling out my own file. I looked directly at Patricia. "It's interesting you would recommend Meadowbrook Manor," I said, my voice calm, "because I've been doing some research of my own." I slid the documents I had compiled across the coffee table toward them. They were photos of the state investigation reports, the consumer complaints, and legal filings against the facility. "Did you know," I continued, "that the state of Connecticut has investigated Meadowbrook Manor twice for predatory marketing to vulnerable seniors? Did you know they have a specific program for asset protection that's been accused of coercing widows into signing away their life savings?" Patricia's composure finally began to crack. She glanced at the documents, her eyes wide with shock. Michael, however, picked up the file and began to read. His face paled as he read the complaints, the accusations of fraud and elder abuse. "Jessica," he said, his voice quiet but sharp, "is this true? Did you know about this?" Jessica went pale, her mask completely gone. She looked from her husband to her mother-in-law, a panicked animal trapped between two predators. She had been so sure of herself, so sure of their plan, but she hadn't anticipated that I would not only see through it, but also arm myself with a truth more powerful than any lie. The silence in the room was deafening. The perfect facade of their family was crumbling, revealing a rot that went far deeper than a daughter's selfishness. And I, Eleanor Vance, the pathetic failure, was finally in control. The silence in the room was a living, breathing thing. It stretched between us, thick with accusations and unspoken truths. Patricia was the first to regain her composure, a mask of cold fury replacing her practiced smile. "This is an outrageous fabrication, Eleanor," she said, her voice like ice. "A few online complaints don't prove a thing. They're isolated incidents, nothing more. A desperate attempt to derail a legitimate family discussion." "Are they?" I asked, my voice as calm as a summer lake. "Because I also have copies of the legal filings, the lawsuits, the state's findings. You can call it what you want, Patricia, but the evidence shows a pattern. A pattern of targeting vulnerable seniors. A pattern that looks very much like what you were attempting here today." Michael, still clutching the file, looked up from the papers. His face was a study in shock and confusion. "Sarah," he said, using her formal name, the one he used in public. "Did you know about this? Did you research this place at all?" Jessica, my own daughter, looked like a child caught in a lie. Her eyes darted between Patricia and Michael, her face a mask of panic. I just went with Patricia's recommendation," she stammered. "She said it was the best. She said it was for your protection." "Protection from what?" Michael's voice was quiet, but it had an edge I hadn't heard before. "From your own mother, while your father was dying." Patricia tried to interrupt. "Michael, this is a family matter. We should discuss this privately." "No," I said, my voice firm. "We'll discuss it now, because this isn't about me. It's about you. It's about your fear of my future needs interfering with your new life. Jessica, you want the perfect family, the perfect life, the perfect house. And a mother who might need care someday is just an inconvenience, a problem to be managed." Tears welled in Jessica's eyes, not from remorse, but from the humiliation of being exposed in front of her husband and mother-in-law. "That's not fair," she whispered. "No," I said. "What's not fair is you calling me a pathetic failure. What's not fair is you planning my future without a single conversation about what I want. What's not fair is you trying to take everything I've worked for, everything your father and I built, and hand it over to a predatory institution." Michael stood up, his face pale with a mix of anger and disgust. He looked at his wife, then at his mother. "I need a minute," he said, his voice flat. He walked out of the room, leaving Jessica to face the mess she had created. The silence that followed was suffocating. Jessica finally broke it, turning to me, her voice shaking with a raw, desperate kind of honesty. "I was scared, Mom," she said, her voice low. "I was terrified. I watched Dad get sick, and I saw how much it took from you. I didn't think I could do it. I didn't think I was strong enough to watch you get older, to watch you get sick. So I convinced myself that the solution was to find someone else to do it. Someone professional. Someone who was better at caregiving than me." The words, though laced with fear and selfishness, were the most honest thing she had said in years. She had spent a lifetime building a perfect facade, but now, in this moment of raw vulnerability, the real Jessica was finally peeking through. I looked at her, this broken, scared girl hiding behind a woman's perfect facade. Jessica, I said softly, being scared is normal, but being scared doesn't justify trying to control someone else's life. The tears began to flow freely now, washing away the carefully applied makeup, leaving streaks of black mascara down her cheeks. I'm not trying to control your life, Mom. I'm trying to protect you. Protect me from what? I asked. From making my own mistakes, from living independently, from having the dignity of making my own choices. I stood up, my own anger softening into a profound sadness. I reached across the coffee table and took her hand. Sweetheart, I've been taking care of myself for 68 years. I raised you. I supported your father through cancer. I managed a library budget and staff. Why do you suddenly think I'm incapable of managing my own life? Jessica looked at me, her eyes filled with a raw, unfiltered kind of pain. I'm so sorry, Mom, she whispered. I'm so sorry. As I walked out of the Ashford estate that night, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt exhausted. The battle for my independence had just begun, but the war for my daughter's soul was far from over. I had exposed the lie, but now I had to find out if the truth was enough to save her. I had given her a choice, but I didn't know if she was capable of choosing a life built on something other than a perfect facade. I was a mother, and my love for my daughter was as fierce and unwavering as it had always been. But for the first time, I wasn't sure if that love was enough to save her from herself. 3 days passed in a tense, unsettling silence. Jessica didn't call. Michael didn't call. I didn't reach out to them. The emotional battlefield of the living room was still fresh in my mind, and I knew that both sides needed time to regroup. I spent my days in the quiet comfort of my apartment, grading papers and organizing my life, a woman meticulously preparing for a war she hoped wouldn't come. My file on Meadowbrook Manor was a constant presence on my kitchen table, a silent testament to my newfound resolve. The call finally came, not from my daughter, but from Patricia Ashford. Her voice was as smooth and polished as ever, a deceptive politeness that I now knew to be a weapon. Eleanor, darling, I do apologize for the unfortunate misunderstanding the other night. Michael and I have talked, and we both feel it's time we put this unpleasantness behind us. I'd like to invite you for a private tea, just the two of us, to clear the air, as it were. I could almost hear the hidden agenda in her voice. Private tea meant a private ambush. She wanted to face me without her son's watchful eye, without Jessica's emotional chaos. She wanted to put me back in my place, and I knew that place was not an equal. That's very kind of you, Patricia, I said, my voice sweet and cooperative. I'm afraid I'm not feeling up to a drive right now. How about we meet at my apartment instead? My place is a bit cozier than your mansion. The silence on the other end of the line was a telling pause. My apartment was a threat to her carefully constructed world. She wanted to control the territory to make me feel small and out of place, but I wasn't playing her game anymore. I'm sorry, Eleanor, that's simply not possible, she said, her voice dropping a degree. My schedule is quite full, perhaps another time. She hung up without another word. Her refusal confirmed my suspicions. She wasn't interested in reconciliation, she was interested in control. But I wasn't going to let her win. 2 days later, she showed up at my door unannounced. It was a bold move, a power play. She was dressed impeccably in a cashmere suit, her pearls glowing against the navy blue fabric. She looked like a queen surveying a peasant's hovel. Eleanor, she said, without even a hello. I didn't have time for a formal appointment. I just wanted to stop by and ensure you're doing well. Michael is so worried about you. Michael and I had a very honest conversation the other night, Patricia. I replied, standing my ground in the doorway. I'm sure he's not worried about me at all. He's probably more concerned about the company his wife and mother keep. She gave a small, humorless laugh. You think you're so clever, don't you? You think you've won. You've convinced my son that his wife is a heartless opportunist and that I'm some kind of villain from a storybook. I didn't have to convince him of anything, I said calmly. I just gave him the facts. The truth has a way of convincing people all on its own. She stepped inside, her eyes scanning my small living room with disdain. The room was neat and clean, filled with stacks of books and a comfortable armchair. It was my sanctuary, but to her, it was a museum of a life she found pathetic. "Let me be clear, Alina," she said, her voice dropping to a low, conspiratorial whisper. "This little rebellion of yours, this pathetic attempt to hold onto a life you're no longer capable of handling, is not going to end well for you. Do you honestly think Jessica's love is stronger than my son's loyalty to his family? Do you honestly think you can come between them?" I looked her straight in the eye. "Patricia, I am not trying to come between them. I am trying to keep my daughter from becoming a woman who abandons her mother for a life of comfort and convenience. I am trying to save her from herself." Her perfect composure finally broke. "Save her? She doesn't need saving. She needs to move on. She needs to live her life. She is married into a family now that can give her everything she's ever wanted. She doesn't need the baggage of a past that holds her back. She doesn't need to be burdened by a mother who will only grow sicker and more expensive to care for. So that's what this is about, isn't it?" I said, a bitter understanding settling in my heart. "Not about my health, not about my safety. It's about me being a burden, about me being too expensive for her new life." Patricia didn't flinch. "It's about being practical, Alina. It's about planning. What happens when you fall and break a hip? What happens when you get sick? Do you expect us to drop everything and take care of you? We have our own lives to live." I took a deep breath, the fight in me rising to meet hers. "No, Patricia, I don't expect you to take care of me. I expect you to respect my right to make my own choices. I expect my daughter to see me as a person worth respecting, not just a problem to be solved." She gave a short, cynical laugh. "Respect, that's a luxury you can't afford, Alina. You're a woman of limited means, you have no power here. You are just a sentimental obstacle in the way of a perfectly reasonable plan." "I may be old, Patricia," I said, my voice a quiet storm, "but I'm not stupid. I can read legal documents. I can spot a bad deal when I see one. And I know that the asset protection you were so eager for me to sign was designed to protect your family's fortune, not mine." For the first time since she had walked in, a flicker of genuine fear crossed her face. She looked at me, not as a pathetic old woman, but as a genuine threat. I had seen her for who she was, and she knew it. The power had shifted. The battlefield had been leveled, and I, the history teacher from a small town, had just won the first round of the matriarch's game. She stood up, her jaw clenched, and without another word, she walked out, the slam of the door echoing in the silence she left behind. Patricia's visit had been a turning point. It had stripped away the last layer of politeness, exposing the raw hostility beneath. I wasn't just an inconvenience to her, I was a threat. She saw that I wasn't going to be easily manipulated, and her frustration had made her careless. She had confirmed everything I'd suspected. This was a calculated game of power and money. The day after her visit, I met with Arthur Jenkins, my retired lawyer friend. I recounted Patricia's impromptu visit, the thinly veiled threats, and her utter contempt for my life. Arthur listened, his expression a mix of concern and admiration. "She's scared, Alina," he said, leaning back in his chair. "You've proven that you're not the helpless widow they thought you were. You've introduced chaos into their perfect plan, and now she's lashing out. So what's the next step?" I asked. "She's not going to give up." "You're right," he replied. "This is just the calm before the storm. She'll try to find another angle. They'll probably hire a top-notch legal team to contest your will, or try to have you declared incompetent. This is where it gets messy." Arthur was right. Over the next few weeks, I received a series of cryptic letters from a law firm specializing in estate litigation. The letters were filled with legal jargon, subtly questioning my mental capacity and the validity of my late husband's will. They hinted at irregularities in my finances and concerns about my ability to manage my own affairs. It was a classic legal bullying tactic, designed to wear me down and intimidate me into compliance. But I wasn't alone anymore. Arthur and I worked together, meticulously documenting every piece of communication, every subtle threat. We drafted carefully worded responses, dismissing their claims and affirming my full legal capacity. I learned to speak their language, to read between the lines, and to see their maneuvers for what they were: desperate attempts to regain control. The legal battle wasn't just about money or power, it was about dignity. It was about my right to a life of my own choosing. I was fighting for my past, for the memory of the life Mark and I had built, and for my future, the one I intended to live on my own terms. The pressure began to mount. The law firm started sending letters to my bank, questioning my financial decisions. They even sent a letter to my doctor, requesting my medical records, a blatant invasion of privacy that Arthur quickly shut down with a stern cease and desist letter. One evening my phone rang. It was Michael. His voice was strained, filled with a weary frustration I hadn't heard before. Alina, I don't know what's going on, but this is getting out of hand. My mother's lawyers are sending us these insane legal threats. What's going on? I took a deep breath. This was my chance. Michael, I'm fighting for my life, I said, my voice quiet but firm. Your mother and Jessica were planning to have me put in a predatory facility and take control of my assets. I have the proof. I showed Jessica all of it. Now Patricia is trying to use legal threats to get me to back down. This is what she does, Michael. She's a professional at this game. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I, I had no idea it was this bad, he said finally. Jessica never told me. She just said you were being difficult. She said you were being paranoid. I wasn't being paranoid, Michael. I was being protected by your late father-in-law, by a promise he made to me before he died. I told him about Mark's final video, about the fear he had lived with, about his quiet observations of Jessica's changing character. Jessica said Dad was confused, he said, his voice now filled with a genuine sadness. She said he wasn't himself in his last days. Your father was many things, Michael, but confused wasn't one of them, I replied. Not about something this important. He was trying to protect me from the very thing that's happening right now. Michael's voice was filled with a dawning horror. What can I do, Alina? I don't want to be a part of this. I don't want this for Jessica either. I thought we were helping you. You can stand by your wife, I said, and you can convince her to stand by me. Tell her to tell you the truth, all of it. Don't let your mother manipulate you into thinking this is about my well-being. It's about her control. The next day, my phone rang again. It was Jessica. Her voice was raw, choked with tears. Mom, Michael knows everything. I told him all of it, about Meadowbrook, about the lawyers. He's furious. He said he doesn't want anything to do with my mother's schemes. He said if I don't support you, he'll leave me. A glimmer of hope flickered in my heart. And what did you say? I asked, my voice soft. I told him I'm on your side, she whispered. I told him I want to help you. I want to fight against Patricia. I want to prove to you that I can be a good daughter again. The legal battle was far from over, but for the first time I wasn't fighting it alone. The facade of their perfect family had been shattered, and in its place, a fragile, new alliance was beginning to form. My daughter, the one who had called me a pathetic failure, was finally on my side, and together, we were ready to face the wrath of the Ashford family matriarch. With Jessica and Michael on my side, the legal battle took on a new dimension. It was no longer just me, a retired teacher and a grieving widow, against the formidable machinery of the Ashford family. It was a family drama, playing out in the cold, sterile light of legal depositions and court filings. Michael, armed with the information I had given him, began to question his mother directly. He confronted her about the Meadowbrook Manor file, about her motives, and about the legal threats her firm was sending. Patricia, cornered, tried to brush it all off as a misunderstanding, but the cracks in her composure were now too wide to ignore. This is not about money, Michael, she insisted, her voice tight with suppressed rage. This is about protecting the family's legacy. What legacy? Michael shot back, his frustration boiling over. The one you built by trying to manipulate my wife and my mother-in-law. Or is there something else you're hiding? That's when Jessica stepped in. She had been quietly doing her own digging, fueled by a newfound shame and a fierce determination to make things right. She had used her public relations background and social media skills to find information about the Ashford family that Patricia had kept hidden for decades. One evening, Jessica called me, her voice a mix of excitement and terror. Mom, I found something big. Patricia has been lying to all of us. Jessica had uncovered a series of articles from old local newspapers and legal records. Michael's grandfather, A man Patricia had always portrayed as a wise and benevolent industrialist, had made his fortune not just through hard work, but through a series of ruthless business maneuvers and hostile takeovers that had ruined several smaller family owned businesses. The generational wealth they had flaunted was relatively new, built on the backs of others' misfortune. That's not even the half of it, Jessica continued, her voice dropping to a whisper. I found a record of a lawsuit from 30 years ago. Michael's grandfather had a business partner, a man named Robert Sterling. When Sterling started showing early signs of dementia, Michael's grandfather, with Patricia's help, tried to force him out of the company. They tried to get him declared incompetent to take control of his shares. The story sent a chill down my spine. It was the exact same playbook Patricia was using on me. She wasn't just using it because it was convenient. It was a deeply ingrained family tradition, a legacy of betrayal and exploitation. Patricia hadn't just been trying to manage the Dorothy situation, she had been reliving a family history of treachery. Jessica had found what I had been searching for, the motive behind the cold calculation. Patricia wasn't just being a social climber, she was a gatekeeper, protecting a facade built on lies. She feared that I, a simple librarian from a small town, would expose her family's true origins and threaten their hard-won social standing. She saw me not just as a financial liability, but as a living, breathing reminder of a past she wanted desperately to erase. When we presented the evidence to Michael, he was devastated. His whole life had been built on the myth of his family's noble, inherited wealth. He had been proud of a legacy that didn't exist, a legacy his mother had built on deception and cruelty. He confronted Patricia, and this time there was no turning back. Was it all a lie, Mom? He asked, his voice shaking with anger. The family business, the legacy, was it all built on lies? Patricia, for the first time, was truly trapped. She couldn't deny the public records, the old newspaper articles. Her perfect composure finally shattered, revealing the desperate, frightened woman underneath. It was for you, Michael, she said, tears streaming down her face. It was all for you. I wanted you to have everything, to be respected, to be a part of a world I never had. I wanted to protect our name. But the name she had been protecting wasn't one of honor, it was one of lies. Michael, heartbroken, made a decision that would change everything. He and Jessica would not contest my will. They would not support his mother's legal battle. He would stand by his wife and the woman who had raised her. I had come to their home hoping for a chance to fight for my independence. I had walked out with my dignity intact. But in the process, I had not only saved myself, but had also, in a way, saved my daughter and son-in-law from a toxic legacy that would have eventually consumed them both. The unveiling of the Ashford family's secret was the true victory, a testament to the power of truth and the quiet strength of a woman who refused to be silenced. The legal battle didn't end with a bang, but with a whimper. Once Michael and Jessica withdrew their support and made it clear they would side with me, Patricia's position became untenable. Her legal team, seeing the case disintegrate and the potential for public exposure of the Ashford family's shady past, advised her to drop all litigation. The official legal battle was over, but the personal one was just beginning. With the legal threats gone, a tense calm settled over our family. Jessica and Michael moved out of the Ashford estate and into a smaller home in a different neighborhood. They needed to create their own life, one built on a foundation of honesty instead of deception. Michael had resigned from his position at his family's company, a move that stunned everyone but me. He told me he couldn't work for a company whose legacy was built on lies. He wanted to build something of his own, something he could be proud of. Jessica, for her part, had quit her job as a social media consultant. She told me she felt like a fraud, helping wealthy clients craft perfect online personas when her own life had been built on a lie. She was lost, uncertain of what to do next. The perfect life she had spent a decade building had shattered, and she was left to pick up the pieces. One afternoon, she came to my apartment unannounced. She was wearing a simple t-shirt and jeans, her face free of makeup. She looked more like the girl I remembered than the woman who had married into the Ashford family. She sat on my sofa, her hands clasped in her lap. "I don't know who I am anymore, Mom," she said, her voice small. I've spent so long pretending to be someone else, someone perfect, that I don't know what's real anymore. I was so focused on being what Patricia wanted me to be, what I thought Michael's family wanted me to be, that I forgot who I was. I sat beside her and took her hand. It was the first time she had ever admitted her true feelings. You're still the girl who used to dig for worms after a rainstorm, Jessica. You're still my daughter, the one who promised to take care of me when your father was gone. That girl is still in there. She looked at me, her eyes filled with tears. But I didn't take care of you, Mom. I tried to get rid of you. I tried to put you in a place that would have taken everything you had. How can you even look at me? Because you're my daughter, Jessica. Real love doesn't disappear when people make mistakes. It just requires everyone to work harder at being honest with each other. She broke down and wept, the years of pressure, ambition, and fear pouring out of her. I held her, stroking her hair like I had when she was a little girl. It was the first time in years that we were just mother and daughter, not two people fighting on opposite sides of a battlefield. Over the next few weeks, we began to rebuild our relationship, one brick at a time. We went to my favorite small-town coffee shop and talked for hours. We cooked together in my kitchen, a space that held so many memories of our family's past. I showed her old photo albums, and we laughed and cried over pictures of Mark, of our old house, and of a time when life was simpler. Jessica started to remember the girl she used to be. The girl who loved history, who cared about people, who valued kindness over money. She started volunteering at a local animal shelter, something she had always wanted to do but never had the time for. She told me she was finally feeling like herself again. One day, Michael came to my apartment to thank me. Eleanor, he said, his voice full of emotion, you not only saved yourself, you saved Jessica from a life of pretense. I've never seen her so happy, so at peace. And you've opened my eyes to the kind of person I want to be. I don't want to live my life like my mother did. I want to build a life with Jessica that's based on integrity, not on wealth and status. I looked at him, at this young man who had once been an obstacle and was now an ally. I could see the good in him, the genuine heart that Jessica had fallen in love with. He was a good man, and I knew he would take care of my daughter in a way that had nothing to do with money or property. The storm had passed. The emotional war was over. And in its place, a quiet, profound healing had begun. I had fought for my dignity and my independence, and in doing so, I had not only won my own life back but had also given my daughter the chance to reclaim hers. My story, which I had once feared was over, was just beginning. It was not a story of a widow in decline, but of a woman, a mother, who had fought for her family and her future, and won a victory more meaningful than any wealth could buy. A year later, my life was unrecognizable. I was no longer the quiet widow living in the shadow of my past. I was a woman stepping fully into her future, a future I had fought for and won. My apartment, once a sanctuary of grief, now felt like a launching pad for new adventures. I had retired from teaching, not out of necessity, but out of a desire to embrace a new chapter. The money from Mark's will, which Jessica and Patricia had so desperately tried to seize, was now mine to do with as I pleased. I had used a portion of it to establish a scholarship fund at the high school where I had taught for so many years. It was called the Mark and Eleanor Vance Scholarship, dedicated to students who showed kindness and resilience, not just academic prowess. It felt like a small way to honor the legacy of the man who had taught me that a life of quiet dignity was worth more than any fortune. Jessica and Michael were thriving. They had bought a small, beautiful home in a neighborhood filled with young families. Jessica had found a new passion for baking and had started a small business selling artisanal bread at a local farmer's market. She was happier than I had ever seen her, her hands dusted with flour instead of polished with expensive jewelry. Michael was teaching history at a community college, a job that brought him immense joy and a sense of purpose. He was building his own legacy, one of integrity and passion, not of inherited wealth and deceit. Our relationship was still a work in progress, but it was built on a foundation of honesty and love. Jessica called me every week, not because she wanted something, but because she wanted to hear my voice. She asked about my new book club, about the art classes I had started taking. She laughed at my jokes and listened to my stories, a genuine interest in her eyes that had been missing for so long. One afternoon, she came over to my apartment to help me pack. I was preparing for a trip to Ireland, a lifelong dream that Mark and I had always talked about but never had the chance to fulfill. It was a trip I was now taking alone, but in a way I knew I wasn't. "I'm so glad you're doing this, Mom," she said, folding one of my sweaters with care. "I'm so glad you said yes to the trip." "It's about time," I laughed. "It's been a long time since I traveled anywhere more exotic than the grocery store." She was quiet for a moment, her gaze far away. "Mom, can I ask you something? Last year, when you were so determined to get me into Meadowbrook, were you really worried about my safety? Or were you more worried about the inconvenience of having an aging parent?" The question hung in the air between us, a ghost of the past that still needed to be exorcised. "Honestly," she said, her voice soft, "it was both. I was scared something would happen to you, but I was also scared of how that would affect my life with Michael. I wanted the peace of mind that comes with knowing someone else was handling the hard stuff." "And now?" I asked. She looked at me, a tear forming in her eye. "Now I realize that the hard stuff is part of loving someone. You can't just outsource the difficult parts of relationships and expect the good parts to remain meaningful. You've proven pretty conclusively that you don't need to be handled by anyone." I laughed, thinking about everything that had led us to this point. Mark's final video, my research into Meadowbrook Manor, the confrontation in Jessica's living room where I had finally stood up for myself, the months of honest conversations and healing that had followed. "You know what your father would say about all this?" I asked. "What?" "He'd say the best gift he ever gave me wasn't the video warning me about your plans. It was teaching me that I was worth fighting for." Jessica's eyes filled with tears. "I think he'd be proud of both of us. You for standing up for yourself, and me for finally learning to see you as a person instead of a problem." As we hugged goodbye, I thought about the journey that had brought us here. The pain of hearing my daughter call me a pathetic failure. The fear of losing my independence to someone else's convenience. The discovery that I was stronger and more valuable than I had ever allowed myself to believe. Mark's final gift had started it all, but the real victory had been learning to see myself the way he had always seen me, as a person worth respecting, worth fighting for, worth loving exactly as I was. Tomorrow I would board a plane for Ireland, not as a burden being managed by my family, but as Eleanor Vance, a woman embarking on an adventure she had dreamed about for decades. Some victories don't come with fanfare or celebration. Sometimes the greatest triumph is simply the quiet satisfaction of knowing you refused to disappear when everyone around you was trying to make you invisible. And that, I thought as I finished packing, was exactly the kind of legacy Mark would have wanted me to create. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it inspires you to always fight for your own dignity, to cherish your family, and to never be afraid to create your own legacy. I wish you all good health and a happy family.